I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, Don MacArthur, who's an architect here in town, working on a lot of very progressive things. So I'm very pleased to introduce Don MacArthur.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks to the New West. Terrific conference so far. Before I get going here, I've got a couple of slides. This actually is a continuing ed thing for folks who are architects, AIA. I know nothing about what the requirements are to get that credit, so talk to the folks at the New West if you're looking for that. I did find out when I was at the AIA that you actually can get credit for being the speaker as well as for listening to the speech, so it's kind of it's a good one for me. I'll need to find out too.
I could just add briefly to that, if you are getting continuing ed again, make sure you talk to Lucia so that the paperwork is in order. And I will say that of the various continuing ed credits that we offer for real estate, for insurance, for attorneys, and for planners, the architects are by far the most finicky. So if you want those architecture credits, make sure to deal with that. So thanks.
Okay, so I've got this slide and this one. And this one, which are required slides for that. This was actually the hardest slide for me to put together. Try to figure out what it is that I'm trying to teach tonight, this afternoon. Okay, now we can move forward. I'm going to talk about sustainable community design in the Rocky Mountain West. In particular, Missoula. I'm an architect and planner in Missoula, and all the projects I'm going to show you when I finally get to projects are in Missoula, and hopefully represent some of the ideas that I have about what good sustainable design would be for our community. The first thing I want to say is just a little bit about sustainability in general. What is sustainability? I think that we have to think about long-term vision, and we haven't been talking that much about long-term vision most of the time here so far. But we have to think about long-term vision both within the context of our local environment and also within the global forces. And I think we focus too often on these issues of how do we deal with our immediate problems that may be urban fringe problems, or they may be transportation issues where we have some congestion or other things like that. I just want to say that I think we're going to be doing business in a very, very different way within this 100-year period. And we've got some forces, some impending crises that are coming our way that we need to deal with, and we need to take steps to dealing with them as we think about what sustainable community design might be. The first of those is peak oil. I've recently seen in a couple of magazines that BP, the oil company, has ads out saying basically we've either reached peak oil or we're darn close to it. We've extracted 50% of the reserves of oil, and we're on the downhill slope, or we're darn close to being on the downhill slope. As we do that, we're going to have a lot less oil to use in our cities, and I'm going to show, hopefully, that our current pattern of development is pretty darn dependent on that very oil. The global warming question, I saw James Hansen from NASA speak. How many people out in the audience saw James Hansen? A smattering, maybe 15 people. He gave a very, very sobering presentation about what global warming is going to bring to our future. The tipping point concept, he presented that if we don't significantly reduce our CO2 production within the next 10 years, we're going to reach a tipping point where our climate changes drastically. The temperature, I forget the number of degrees that he said, but the temperature is going to go well higher than it is currently, and ice caps will melt, millions of people around the edges of our oceans are going to be displaced. And most sobering of all, I thought, was that if we reach that tipping point, he believes that 50% of all species on Earth will become extinct. We don't want to be one of those species. We don't want anyone else, any of the other species, to become extinct either. Those two factors together also are going to influence our food production, and I'm going to talk some more about food production as we go forward, but it's obviously hugely dependent on our oil resources and our transportation system, and also dependent on our climate being relatively stable. Okay, so now going from the sort of big picture vision of what's the context globally, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what's our context locally. This slide was prepared for me by the Office of Planning and Grants, Dave Gray, and actually reads better. I've shown this before, and it reads better on this screen. All the orange land, this is a good portion, not all of the county of Missoula, but a good portion of it. The orange represents land that has significant constraint, greater than 25% slope. It's in the floodplain. It's owned by a public agency. The gray area, pretty minimal, is the area that is developable. There's no constraint on it. And the green area is the area of prime farmland within our community. And so this is just doesn't show anything about development right yet. It just shows some of the constraints and shows how limited our ability to develop in this valley is. Here's where we are right now, and these are data that Dennis Glick from the Sonoran Institute showed at a much larger scale last evening. But it shows each red dot represents obviously residential development. And I overlaid it over the prime farmland and over the developable area so we could start to see where we are now. And they have also projected, using the last 10 years to project out 10 years, they projected where we might be in 2015, and then again to 2025. Let me do that again, if I can make it go back. Okay, here's where we are now. Watch that green area and the developable area, and just the spread of the dots. One more time, just for fun. Okay, so the questions about these things are: is that a sustainable pattern? Do we need to make drastic change? And I think the answer is yes. If you continue this out, the current projections show that we'd be about 200,000 people in the year 2060, 2065, something like that. And not only that, but we're also developing in a way that each new residence that we build takes more land, not less, statistically, and each new resident within a dwelling unit is using more square footage. So we're spending land and we're spending resources more and more. And I think that at least that status quo scenario shows that farmland is having no significant protection. I would argue that this entire system that we're looking at depends on the cheap transportation that right now is only possible with fossil fuels. I don't think we have a viable, believable alternative, and I think that we need to start thinking about cities that respond to these issues. So I believe the status quo is simply not workable. We could solve the problems that we've talked about so far in this conference. And if we don't solve our contributions to global warming and to changing some of our practices, we're in a lot of trouble. So a couple of my ideas about how we might respond to these issues. Response to peak oil, obviously we've got a fragile transportation system if we don't come up with alternatives to fossil fuels to move things around. We need to do more things locally and not expect to ship food from China to here, not expect all our goods to come from China to here, but produce them and consume them locally and generate more production capability here. We need to provide within our community different transportation options, not just more of a car-centered future, but possibilities about mass transit as well. Global warming, I think we need to think about obviously doing everything more efficiently, but we also need to think about our use of materials, and every material we use in a building or in fact in any process, we need to think about the use of that now, but also how it's going to be reused and reused without loss of quality. And that's the kind of cradle to cradle concept. And closing loops, we want to come back around to this idea that we're going to, any waste out of any production process gets reused somehow in a productive way. Response to food production, again, I think we need to have believable local food production. And some folks here in Missoula are doing a good job to move toward that. So a new paradigm's kind of required, I think. We can't just do what we're doing better. We've got to do something different and new. Less bad isn't good enough. I think our system is just not going to respond to those issues. Some of the things we do need to do on the global sense, I think our system needs to be fueled and fed. We need all of our energy use and all of our food needs to be fed with contemporary solar input. You know, the amount of watts per square foot that hit the earth each year needs to provide all our transportation needs and all our food needs, and we can't bank on using fossil fuels forever. They may last for a while, but not forever. At a more local level, I think of what we need to do is kind of an ecologically connected urbanism. We've seen a lot of people talking about the importance of developing our cities and developing in our cities. I agree with that, and I think that we also need to, while we're developing and redeveloping our cities, we need to think about how our cities influence the rural lands also, and that those rural lands be used only as working lands in the production of food, or be used for ecosystem services. But I do not believe that in this future that we can think that we are going to create ranchettes in our rural areas. There's no place for it. You know, lots of challenges I'm setting out here, but there's also an opportunity to do something wonderful, and we can reimagine what we are. The first step, I think, is to think about the force of transportation and land use and how transportation can actually provide a key sort of leadership toward developing in the right place and in the right way. And I'm going to show a project that we did, actually a competition entry in a minute. But before that, I wanted to attempt another definition. We heard from Thornburg yesterday some of those change one letter things, and I think that we could also do, instead of castration, we could do carstration. And carstration, the definition of that would be, I've got to look at my notes here to see if I can find it, rendering low-income people financially impotent through the costs of owning their car. And I think that happens in Missoula. There's a lot of people who spend almost all of their income maintaining and owning their car so that they can commute from someplace they can afford a house into Missoula where they can work. And we need some options for that so that they can generate equity. Did I go the wrong direction here somewhere? Okay. So let's see. This is a competition entry that we did a few years ago. It was sponsored by Homeward and MRA here in Missoula, and I was looking at a single particular little site down on the south end of Brook Street. Can't make this pointer. Oh, there it is. Down here around the Kmart shopping center. We, of course, took this thing and thought about it in a much bigger context and looked at what should the whole Brook Street corridor be, and is there a way that we could redevelop the concept of our city around a new transportation, linear transportation system. We suggested doing and you can barely read this, I apologize for this slide, but we suggested a streetcar system, maybe a little bit like Portland's, that would run up and down this bright yellow dashed line here, and that each one of these nodes along here would be a commercial activity zone, And this whole area that is darkened here would be an area of intensive residential redevelopment. In fact, it would be coordinated with land use in such a way that rather than having minimum density or having maximum densities, it would have minimum densities for any redevelopment area. And to frame this, the idea behind this was that this area, if redeveloped at this kind of intensity, could provide all of the growth that I showed on up through that 2025 slide. Every new residence could be fit in this one small area and supported by a new mass transit that would totally transform our city and in a way that would, I think, be a lot more sustainable long term. Let's see. This is a building that now I'm finally actually to real projects, not just pie in the sky. This is a building that we designed for Dave Edgell and Colin Bangs. It's actually within that corridor that we just looked at. And it's a 4-story condo building, and it actually looks like this right now. It's going to be finished in just a month or so. 33 condo units. It's at about 44 dwelling units per acre or thereabouts. Underground parking. It's right near, there's a trail system that runs along the edge of it here. It's right across from the mall, so that there's some commercial activity right there. And it suggests a future that doesn't require a car. Here's another project that we did. You saw this last night a little bit. This is the Gold Dust. This is affordable housing on the north side of Missoula. And it has, again, about 40 dwelling units per acre. It's again, a redeveloped site. And it has a number of green measures in it as well. Up on the top of this roof was the largest photovoltaic array in Montana at the time that it was constructed. We used metal extensively on the exterior because of its ability to be recycled and in the kind of cradle to cradle sort of model that we could use those materials again and again over time. Couple more photos of that. It also was envisioned as a redevelopment of a neighborhood, and there were some big gaps. This was an empty site when we got it, and it had been the site of a hotel historically that kind of faced and served the railroad when we first developed the city. So there's a shot of it. We tried to create some public amenity. There's a community room that actually has an art gallery that is in that zone that kind of opens out onto the street and has a nice balcony over it. And up here, I'll show you a slide of the roof garden that's up on the top. Connecting to the landscape, of course, is partly about providing places even at urban densities where people can get their hands in the dirt and connect with the surrounding beauty of Missoula. This also has 4 apple trees that produce fruit up here, and each resident has a plot that they can actually do some farming at a very, very small scale. I guess gardening is a better term. That they can do their tomatoes and a few flowers or things. This is a different scale project, and obviously we need a lot of different kinds of projects to think about how our city might be. We can't just do 40 dwelling units per acre. We need residents to have options. This is a project we're just finishing that's on the west side, and it's at about 16 dwelling units per acre. And each one of the units that I'm showing you is a single family dwelling unit, but at a much higher density than what the underlying neighborhood is. It's an infill project. That's kind of a bad word in Missoula. But I think that it shows that you can do infill projects in an interesting way architecturally. They can be sustainable in a number of ways, and I'll talk about that in a second, and still fit into the kind of scale of the neighborhood. There's another shot of the same building. We did use, again, metal siding, which we like a lot, and there's some interesting things. We used bamboo fencing for the first time, which was kind of a neat product, and these are super high efficiency units, and we have done a lot of computer modeling to actually simulate the use of energy over time for these buildings, and think that it's going to be very, very low. They're still not carbon neutral. They're still not maybe quite far enough, but we're taking some steps toward it. and we're showing how you can have individual small yards and still develop individual units that have twice or even 3 times the density that is typical in these kinds of neighborhoods in Missoula. There's another shot. We kind of think of it as a modern bungalow court, and we're actually looking at the backyards of these units. There's another unit over here, and then there's 3 units on the other side of a little courtyard back that you can see back, just get a glimpse of back there. So it's a little different pattern, but we still tried to work within the context of the neighborhood. So those examples that I showed you, I think, are in the less bad. We're moving toward the right steps, but we also need to do more, I think. And I saw a talk in San Antonio recently by a man named William Reed, who, I don't know if he coined the term, but he certainly is one of the main proponents of this term of regenerative design, that we need our architecture to actually go in and heal and think about ways that we can tie our architectural activity to the social, economic, and environmental issues of our place. Okay, looks like I'm doing okay on time. So what could these be, and what could we do here? This is a project that we designed. I can't take credit for a lot of what I think are the regenerative functions of this. I think a lot of the way that this kind of heals really had to do with the Good Food Store and the great work that they're doing. But let me just highlight a few things. This is a reuse, and it's not even an adaptive reuse. It's simply a reuse of what was an aging grocery store in a whoops, went backwards instead of in an older shopping center, a Grayfield site, if you will. And we came back in and recreated a shopping. A food store here, and some of the interesting things that we wanted to do were to create more pedestrian friendliness and really reconnect this store to the neighborhood in a different way, not completely car dependent, even though it isn't a car dependent kind of model. So we created a lot of new pedestrian amenity along the front and more welcoming entries and places for bikes and a little cafe that spills out onto the street. Some of the cool things that the Good Food Store is doing that makes this kind of a regenerative project is the way that they're linking their sales of local produce. They're creating markets for our farmers that allows the farmer to make a reasonable profit by selling and highlighting and featuring their products. And this slide was taken, I think, before the homegrown label became there, but now as you go around, you actually have labels on each one of the local sellers' produce indicating where it came from and the fact that it was grown in Montana or is a homegrown thing. And I think that's fantastic in a way of hooking up our consumers. We know where that food comes from, and we know that we can support somebody locally growing good food. We know the provenance of that food, and it's a beautiful regenerative process. This is another project I want to go through pretty quickly, but this is an affordable housing project right at the edge of Missoula. It's 35 units of affordable housing, and I show you the site plan to just indicate that it's a 4.5-acre site around the perimeter. And we clustered the 5 buildings on the site into about half of that site and reserved the rest of it for an orchard and a garden down in here. So this was a way to show that we could actually do double the underlying density. This is about 8 dwelling units per acre. We could do double the density and still preserve half of the site in perpetuity for small-scale farming. Here's what it looks like. And we obviously picked up some of this kind of farm vernacular kind of look, and there's some, you can see that we actually park underground the main building there. Another shot of it. This is the farmhouse, if you will, that peeks out onto Grove Street, which is really the front. What you were looking at before was kind of off Reserve Street. These are row house style units. There's 9 of these. And here's a shot that kind of looks from the community barn of this that has a community room and looks across the sort of internal community courtyard space that we created through some public art and over across to the row houses. So in that project, we did a whole number of pretty interesting sustainability measures, but I wanted to look at just 3 of them to think about how we might look at regenerative moves and how our selections of products could actually change the way we think about our local economies and be more regenerative. So 100% fly ash concrete. This is kind of technical. People probably don't know what fly ash concrete is, but concrete is mainly made with Portland cement and sand and aggregate and water. And you can replace Portland cement with fly ash, which is a byproduct of coal-fired power plants. I'm not suggesting that we should continue to use a lot of coal-fired power plants, but as we have a lot of those currently, we should use the waste product of that, which is the fly ash, and try to use as much of it as we can in concrete. And we found out that there was some folks at MSU who were actually experimenting with doing concrete that was 100% fly ash instead of some small portion. That means there was no Portland cement in it whatsoever. This is important because the creation of Portland cement uses 6 to 8% of all the CO2, or creates 6 to 8% of all the CO2 annually in the world. So we did this experiment, and this was a failed batch that actually started to set up in the truck, and I probably shouldn't have showed that, but we were successful ultimately. And this is the straw bale barn building that we built on top of that fly ash concrete foundation. And we're now looking at a project for the Missoula Federal Credit Union where we're going to actually make some concrete that is made completely with fly ash and with crushed recycled glass and has no product in it that isn't either a waste product of another industrial process or recycled. Another piece that we looked at was this, what we call good wood. People are probably pretty familiar with that at this point, but good wood, or Missoula folks maybe. We were looking at the way we were going to build our buildings, and we realized that we were going to do light frame construction using typical studs and joists, and we were trying to figure out how we could do that in a sustainable way. There are sustainability programs for that kind of product. For FSC, Forest Stewardship Council, does sustainable harvested lumber and certifies it, but we realized that that was going to be shipped from 2,000 miles away to us, and we still didn't really know what the character of that forest was where this was being harvested from. And we also realized that our timber industries in Montana are not always doing that well, and wouldn't it be nice if we could hook up our need for timber to the local economy and make sure that it got harvested in a way that we liked in terms of the forest. So we were able to do all that. We created a partnership with Mark Vandermeer, who's a local Native Forest Network guy who knows a lot about sustainability in the forest, and we actually tagged logs out in the forest, brought those to a mill locally, and then brought them to our project to use. And the whole thing it was done within 120 miles of here, and we were able to, we can go look at the effects of that harvest in the forest. And I think we need to think about how we do that with all of our products. How can we go make sure that what we're doing is good for the earth? Here's just a shot showing some of that good wood. It's equivalent to the other wood that you can buy anywhere, and it's stamped the same way, et cetera. It's now being, I understand this is now being carried at Boyce Lumber, or it's planned to be, so it's become more mainstream. And finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the community-supported agriculture, the farm portion of that project, and the way that we tied. I think I'm doing okay still. The way that we tied that the project both to the idea of food production within our urban areas, but also to the idea that we would really further the cultural understanding of the land. And the original subdivision of this piece of land was called Orchard Homes, and the point of Orchard Homes was to think about small-scale agricultural parcels in concert with residential. And within the next year or two, I think this is going to be the only project that actually still represents that look. So I think we're creating a cultural continuity as well as the food production. Also, obviously, we were looking for some carbon neutrality issues too. There's a shot of it from the gardens. And I wanted to end with just kind of saying that it's easy for us to say, oh my gosh, global warming, how do we ever address that? I think that we each need to think about ways that the activities that we do, whether they be architecture and building industry activities, development activities, how does each move that we do kind of move toward dealing with the big picture, but dealing with it locally. I think we need to focus our activities on local connection, working with these to create our goods locally, to use our goods locally, tie those loops together, and work in a very smaller sphere than we've been used to in this global economy. So I'll wrap up there and move to some questions.
Great, thanks. Thanks very much, Don. We have time for just just a couple of questions, and I'm gonna start with the first one, and in a way, it's the obvious one, which is you showed a lot of very interesting things there. When you look at something like, you could interpret your presentation as saying, well, you know, we should all shop at the good food store, and we should all use this good wood, which is presumably more expensive, and we should all live in these kind of small energy efficient places without yards and do a little farming on the roof. And I think a lot of people would say, well, you know, first of all, we can't afford, you know, most people can't afford to shop at the good food store. And second of all, most people don't want to live in a small metal place with a little farm on the roof. And so there kind of needs to be a connection between sort of market demand and what people want essentially, and some of these broader goals. So how do you kind of square that circle?
Okay, there's a lot of questions there. The market demand, I think, I'd like to start with that one, because I think that we have to not just be saying to ourselves, what does the market demand? Because I think if we follow the market demand right now, it's going to be too late, and we're going to fail in our resolution of the crises of global warming in particular. So I don't think we can just respond to market demand because it's not going to be good enough. We've got a 10-year timeline here. So back to the question of the incremental cost. I read somewhere recently that the Americans spend less on their food than any civilization ever in history. And I think that we have to say no. We're going to be able to spend more on our food, and the way we're going to spend more on our food is to be less car-strated. I guess, you know, if we could have options, then the people who are at that place where they have to evaluate, do I buy organic, locally produced food at the good food store? They have some options. They could not own a car maybe instead, and live in a beautiful way in our city. So I'm not saying that these are the only options. Clearly, people will need to live in the landscape, and they will. Many people, and myself included, really resonate with that idea of being out in the landscape, and I don't think that we should try to stop that. Although I do think we should try to stop it in some places. You know, no prime farmland ever again. Never in the urban wildland interface. You know, we saw lots of dots going in that undevelopable area, and who's paying for the fire protection out there? We are, and I don't think we should be. I think we need to stop and think clearly about where the future of our civilization is going to go.
Well, and I would just say that I think that there are, sort of market ways that some of those things can happen too, because if you take the market out of the equation, then you're in a whole nother discussion, but sort of incentive-based things are some ways to get there, I think.
And we're architects. We work on real-world projects most of the time, and so we kind of think of it as each time we have a project that comes to us, we want to think about how we can model a future that other developers or other architects may see value in. I mean, that's how we can move the whole thing forward, is on a project basis rather than on a regulation basis.
Right.
What are you looking for from local government to advance your ideas?
I think the biggest thing right now that I see that local government could do is to really get on board with a transportation vision. I think that's the one that the community needs to come together to do the most, is to get a transportation plan that looks, it's a conservative plan. Jonathan labeled me a progressive up at the beginning, and I really see myself kind of more as a conservative. I'm looking at ways to, what happens if this is right? If global warming does hit a tipping point, what happens if we don't have oil in 15 years in the same way we do now? We need to plan for options. We need to plan in a way that allows there to be a good future for our community within that. This is kind of off the point, but I was thinking about what Thornburg said yesterday morning about pyramid schemes and net present value. And I kind of look at some of the development that we're doing right now and wonder if the net present value of those homes in this in a peak oil isn't zero or less than zero. It actually is harming our ability to farm and our ability to sustain ourselves locally. And we need to be really serious about doing whatever. I'm trying to tie back into your question. We need to be really serious to tie back transportation systems and infrastructure, I think, are what leads the development patterns. So that's where I think local government and regulation need to kind of move toward, is to foster, in my view, what we need, which is mass transit, believable mass transit.
Another question in the back?
Yeah, you say no more development of prime agricultural land. What do you say to that landholder? Sorry? Or is there some proposal to compensate them for non-use of that?
Obviously, we need to compensate them, and I believe that transfer of development rights would be, or purchase of development rights would be an appropriate way to deal with this. And I think that the corridor that I showed on the Brook Street would be an ideal sending zone for those development rights. And you just asked over here, what could the governing bodies do? Well, one of the things we need to do, and I think it was alluded to earlier, is we need to create development rights through the process of zoning. Most of the county where we have prime farmland isn't zoned, and so there is no development right associated with that land right now. If we can zone it, then there's a development right, and then we can transfer those.
Time for one more, if there's one more question. In the front here.
If you have I have a small lot of in Hamilton. We don't have any of this down there, and I'd like to have this to show what good development can do. If you have a small lot on the south side of Hamilton, which is old-fashioned cottage-style houses, and you want to put a small, because I lived in Europe for a while, and they had these wonderful designs, and everybody lived together and got along. And I'd like to have some example of that in Hamilton so that people would start to regenerate the houses that I was raised around and not feel like it's this thing that's been put into, kind of shoved in beside other homes. And would you have a design that would, like you have the farm design, would you have a home, a cottage style, or a...
In our design work, we attempt to be very specific in our response to each setting. And we have done, if I would have had more time, I would have showed you another half dozen residential remodel projects that we do. And we've done a lot of them in Missoula, and we tend to be very much more historically kind of contextual, I guess, because someone said it earlier, I think Roger said it earlier, about the good neighborhoods that we have. We want to reinforce them and not cause stress in them. I'm not afraid to think that we might do buildings that would be of our time and reflect the imperatives of global warming, be super energy efficient. But a lot of times that can be done in ways that's very contextually sensitive to the buildings around it and reinforces those good patterns that exist.
I just have a real quick question, and I love the corrugated metal that you use, but I'm wondering, when you're talking about global warming and a rise in temperature, how does that metal all over the house and roof translate into, I mean, is it like 500 degrees in there? I mean...
Well, obviously these questions all depend a little bit on color and things like that. The corrugated metal, some of what we use is pretty reflective, actually, and that reflects a lot of the heat. Almost all of the time that you use corrugated metal, and this is kind of getting technical, but corrugated metal actually, of course, doesn't really sit directly on your wall. It has airspace behind it, and the natural convection of air comes and cools the back of that metal. So it isn't actually a hot material. In some ways, it's a cool material because of the convection patterns there. We do try to think about when we're doing particularly flat roofs, we like to use white materials and things like that to lower the heat gain, because that's really pretty significant. And you'll notice on the slide that's up here, that's the south facade that you're looking at of the building, and every window on the south facade is carefully shaded. And that's where most of the heat gain comes from. And we think that any kind of passive strategies we can do like that don't require energy input in order to keep ourselves cool are obviously the first order of business with our design.
So does that radiant heat off the metal, could that be conducive to starting plants earlier in the spring?
Well, the radiant heat, of course, is at the top of the building. I mean, the cool air gets sucked in at the bottom, and it gets let out 20 or 30 feet up. And I haven't actually looked, like on the Gold Dust roof garden, is it getting us greened up faster along the edges of that roof garden? I haven't checked. We'd have to do some real temperature testing to figure out whether that was making a difference.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Don. That was a terrific presentation. And from the Rocky Mountain Development Group, Betsy Hands from Homeward, and some of those projects are Homeward projects, actually, and Jennifer Zung, who's joining us from Teton Valley, Idaho, which is a place that's experienced extraordinary growth as well, and will provide some good context for this. So once we get all arranged here. Now I wanted to kind of kick this off with just picking up directly on some of Don's themes and frankly, my theme when I look at some of these kinds of ideas, and I really do think that one of the big questions that arises in people's minds is, is the affordability issue, or to frame it in a slightly different way, can you be green and sustainable and also without dramatically increasing the prices of homes and other kinds of buildings? And the sort of macro, super macro issues about peak oil, and you can say, well, if oil, you know, if gasoline is $10 a gallon, it's way more expensive to live in the country, and that's true, but for now, you know, that isn't the case. And Rick, I know you've had some direct experience with this, and I was wondering if you could share your experience in trying to build homes that are more sustainable than other things around.
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan. I started my career trying to build a couple of green subdivisions down just south of Missoula in Lolo, in Stevie, and down in Victor. And I guess by conventional standards, they would be considered green subdivisions. My partner and I thought that we could build green subdivisions, and just through our commitment to using new technologies and holding to our ideals, we could produce a product that was cost comparative to conventional product. This is, you know, developing land, subdivisions, and selling lots, not building houses. And I'm not going to say that it can't be done. We weren't able to do it. We found that the trade-offs between cost and sustainable design, sustainable building processes, and sustainable products were higher, you know, to the tune of 20 to 30%.
So 20 to 30% more expensive in what particular kinds of, which aspects of it were more expensive?
Well, that would be unique to each project. And I really don't like to be saying this, because I'd like to be saying that that wasn't the case and to be offering hope. But, you know, it would depend on whether you were looking at, preserving more open space, and therefore either sacrificing the number of lots you were producing or sacrificing the size of the lots you were producing. Lots are usually priced based on comparable sizes of other subdivisions in similar locations with similar amenities. Or if you're looking at specific technologies to xeriscape your landscaping, or to recycle your rainwater, to, you know, try to responsibly deal with drainage issues. All of those things ended up being more complicated, adding expense, or being more expensive in terms of the actual materials and technologies.
Jennifer, what's your experience in that regard?
Of course, I'm not a developer, and so we just design everything.
But presumably your clients are price sensitive, right?
Right, they are. And I will agree with some of the things that Rick said, in that when developers are looking at the size of the lots that they end up with in a certain subdivision, and they're third-acre lots, then they are being compared with other lots that are a third acre, and whether or not those are adjacent to open space isn't always as apparent. And so I think marketing and the real estate agents that are marketing these lots, that it's very important that you're really comparing apples to apples. As far as subdivision developments, I think some of the green and sustainable technologies are actually less expensive than conventional designs. I mean, our company, we specialize in land planning and civil engineering for low-impact developments, and the term low-impact development actually started in the East Coast in Maryland, actually, and it came out of a philosophy of stormwater system design, that instead of treating stormwater as a wastewater that needed to be treated and put into drainage inlets and pipes and then treated in large detention basins, it actually used the natural processes and tried to emulate the natural hydrologic cycle. And so actually you reduce infrastructure costs, because instead of putting stormwater into pipes, expensive concrete pipes, you're putting them into drainage swales and using the water as a resource to water rain gardens and things like that. And so some of those developments, and I do have a slide if we get to that, but basically it just shows that a particular development had lower infrastructure costs. They ended up with more lots in this particular development, and they saved, I'll wait for the slide, I don't want to ruin the punchline. How much money did they save?
That's my fault. I don't know what I did. I was looking at somebody's email here. Here, Michael, if you can deal with that, I apologize. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jenna.
That's okay. So anyway, in the end, because of you doing a conservation type design instead of a conventional design, in addition to the lower infrastructure costs and faster lot sales and all the benefits from having more open space and things like that, narrower streets, the total economic benefit was $2.2 million, which seems pretty good to me. I don't know.
You know, if I
Well-
may, I think that the base question that you ask is, can green development be made to be the same cost or less expensive than non-green development, the development that isn't designed with a sustainable bent? And I think the short answer is, if you take apples to apples, a half-acre lot to a half-acre lot, which isn't sustainable to begin with, the answer is no. The clear answer is that to do things in a green, sustainable manner costs more money. I think beyond that, though, the answer gets a little more complicated and a little more intriguing, in that we're talking about a new paradigm of design and development. We're talking about redeveloping the Wilma building in an urban core. We're talking about offering a different product than the standard, for lack of a better term, run-of-the-mill, although development that we've seen over the years. So not only with, it is not an apples-to-apples comparison. If sustainable development is going to, and green construction and architecture are going to take hold, and I think they are, and we can talk about that a little bit, a new paradigm of development and design has to take hold. And one perfect example of that is that you cannot build a 3,500 square foot house that is out of green materials and the lumber that Don talked about and all of the great things that we saw in the last presentation for the same cost that you can going to Home Depot and buying everything off the shelf with no awareness of where it's coming from or sustainable issues. The short answer on how to do it for the same dollars is learn to design a wonderful environment that's a smaller amount of square footage. And that's an architectural example, and I think that would branch across the development, the land use. In order for us to capitalize on the green marketplace, we have to be designing a new product, bottom line.
I would like to add in, from the Homewards perspective, we've been doing this for 12 years, and we started as a small, little feisty nonprofit, and our founding leader based their decisions on the fact that you cannot build for the future without taking in mind the environment. And when you're looking at housing specifically, you have to start small and then get bigger. So our first project were 2 straw bale homes, and they're on the north side, they're within the city, and they were for a moderate income family at 80% of area median income. But more than that, we learned from each project and added more in. And I think it's important I will point out some things that we've done that are very cost effective and have met the bottom line. We do have to meet a bottom line because our budgets are tight. I think it's important to recognize that if you are talking about a half-acre lot, that's not what we do. And I also don't think that's sustainable. And so we do have to shift our perspective on this. But examples of things that we've done that were cost-effective, that you can replicate and do in your own project, are reusing an old building. Historic preservation is an incredibly important step for us to take because those building materials have already been extracted and are existing, and you don't have to actually extract any further. You can just renovate and use some old hardwood floors. All of the, you create beauty with what you're doing. So that's one example. We've also learned through experimenting and developing partnerships in the community where the materials are available locally. And if you can go directly to the manufacturer and skip the middleman, you can save quite a bit of money. So for instance, with the Goodwood, that was actually a relationship that we had with Mark Vandermeer, who lives on the north side and happens to be a friend of mine. And you know, it was a first stab at something that's now grown so that his wood is available at Home Resource. And one of the things that Missoula has as an asset, which I think is so rich to share with the rest of the country, is that you develop those relationships and you can actually create a new product that serves the housing market. The Goodwood's hard to even keep at Home Resource right now, and it does cost compare if you're doing construction. The fly ash that we use and really pushing it to 100% was a collaborative effort with Montana State University. So we were able to do that because their engineering wanted to learn how far could you push that ratio. That's the highest ratio that's been done in the country, 100% fly ash. People other developers and designers drop their mouth. But if you look at the cost of Portland cement, anybody in here that's actually a developer will know that that's a very expensive material, and it's actually the most resource-intensive, energy-intensive product that you can use in your housing. So if there's anything you can do to reduce that cost and reduce the impact of using concrete, then by all means, do it. And we actually, through doing the fly ash, we're able to get concrete manufacturers, the folks that are mixing it and bringing it to site, to start to incorporate fly ash into their product. There's other materials. The linoleum we use, the marmoleum in all of our kitchens and bathrooms is an excellent product that is very earth-friendly. So, maybe you're not doing a tile floor, but this product is actually being used more and more in hospitals and schools because it's very clean and hygienic. It has a great antimicrobial effect, and it's not vinyl, which is what the affordable housing developers have to use. So we use just a little bit extra for doing linoleum or marmoleum, whatever you want to call it, but actually it pays off for us very quickly because we don't have to replace it as often and do a lot of maintenance on it like you have to do with vinyl. So I think you really have to look at the incremental steps you can take to get to what you consider green. But I guess the one thing that I want to say that's most important in this whole process that hasn't been brought up is that you need to have an integrated design process. If you don't have an integrated design process, if you don't include your neighborhood, that we start with a community design shred, if you don't include your engineers and consultants in the very first beginnings of your design, then you're actually not going to find those cost savings. You're not going to be able to do it if you're trying to throw it in at the very end and say, well, this is what the market says is green. Green is very holistic, and you can't use the same model of development if you don't have it at the core of your belief and your mission. And I think that Homeward has shown through many, many different stages of our projects that they can be green and they can be cost effective. I guess the one last thing I want to point out is one of our innovative partnerships is having recycled glass, because Missoula struggles with glass recycling. And we started a project to actually raise money for our organization where we picked up by bike people's glass. And we took that glass to Ozzy's, right down on the north side, really local, collected it all, had it pulverized, and used it underneath all of our road beds. Well, that is something that is known in the industry as a great use of recycled glass, and it's being done over. We've seen the Missoula Federal Credit Union now is doing it for their LEED certified building. So there's so many areas that you have to think about, and you really have to start with the integrated design process.
That's actually a great segue into two slides that I have that talk about this.
I'm scared to touch the slides now, so
Okay.
I'm gonna...
Actually, this is the first,
Okay.
The title of this topic is Development and Sustainability and Tapping the Green Marketplace. And this is actually a slide of the back cover of our brochure, which you can see, like I said, we focus on low impact development, and just a word, we can get more into what sustainable really means later, but the reason I use, and stop there, a low impact development is I think that that's what we're really talking about. We're not really talking about pure sustainable design or green design or because I think it's hard to be pure in any of those. And so what we're really talking about is kind of a low impact, and we can go into whether being not as bad is good enough. But anyway, so as far as the processes,
Well, being not as bad is better than being bad, I guess, right?
Yeah. Say about that on later. Oh, we have a lot of time. But anyway, so this paradigm shift that the last speaker and also Betsy was talking about, with conventional planning, it's a very linear process, and there's little community input, and the project often is first identified, and then you maybe even plan it, and then a site is found, and then it's engineered. And as a civil engineer that worked in the Front Range of Colorado on a lot of sprawl developments for a lot of years, I often felt like, as you can see on this slide, I was trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And that's where I think trying to do a sustainable design at the end, like at that very end part, the engineering part, is when you get into a lot of expense, when you're trying to put it in at the end. So if you flip to the next slide, so are we doing this differently? And I have this labeled conservation design, but it's basically everything that we're talking about, and that it is very much a collaborative effort, and it involves the community and public officials and that integrated design team, where you get the architect and the engineer and the contractor and the owner and everyone involved in the project together at the very beginning, before you start anything. And I think the community part is really important, because if we're trying to do developments that are benefiting our communities, we should get their input. You know, if it's really a benefit, that they're going to be in support of it. And if your neighbors don't like the development, they're going to let you know, or they're going to have something to say about your development at some point. And it might as well be at the very beginning of the planning process and work it into what you're doing, and it not happen at the preliminary plat hearing in front of P&Z, which is what I see a lot. And then out of this collaborative design process, the development and the design evolves out of that collaboration and out of looking at the site characteristics and the whole site part of it, and really evaluating your site, I think, is important too. And so, I mean, that gets into looking at solar orientation and everything else that I think is really important and is often overlooked in a lot of designs.
And there's, you know, to Don's point earlier, right, the sort of site selection itself. I mean, where are you going to build whatever it is you're going to build is the first thing. Well, you know, Jeff, as a working architect, I mean, how do you kind of move towards that? I mean, because I assume the traditional process, right, is that somebody's got a piece of land and they come to you and they say, I want to build a house, and you're already 3 steps down this thing, right? So
I think that's, you know, the term tapping the green marketplace. I think that's a very good question, and let me tell you a little bit about our firm profile, because I think we have a very interesting group here, and I think we need to listen very carefully to Rick. We've talked a lot prior to this, the 4 of us and the 5 of us, a little bit about what we were going to talk about today. And I've done some private development. I'm a developer, but I'm mainly an architect. I have a business that has a constant income stream from architecture. Rick, at the end of the room here, is a pure developer. That's what Rick does, and I think that the very interesting thing that we all need to listen to is, out of the 4 or 5 of us that we've had discussions over the last couple of days, Rick, although very adamant about sustainable development, is also the most pessimistic of us. And that's because it's got to make money. And if I do a development, it doesn't make money, I'm still an architect. If Rick does a development, it doesn't make money, he doesn't make money. And so to segue back to your question a little bit, I started a company with a partner 15 years ago, and we were an architecture firm. We were not sustainably bent. I don't think LEED was around, at least I didn't know about it. Green architecture was not hot. It was not discussed. Today you can open any architecture magazine, and the first 4 articles are about sustainable architecture, and the next 4 ads are about the sustainable conference you can fly to and burn a bunch of CO2 to go to New York City and have a good time talking about using lots of cool green materials. So the industry has completely changed. I'm old guard, and started a firm based on doing good work for mainly resort-based clients in the mountains of western U.S. What I've seen in my profession in the last 2.5 years is a complete change by the consumer. Not a complete change, a huge difference in awareness. And the one clear example I can give you all of that is every client that I've ever had, public or commercial, private residence, we give a questionnaire to at the beginning of the project. And it's all different kinds of questions. It's called a programming questionnaire. How many bedrooms do you want? How many offices do you need? Depends on the project. And there's 3 questions that have been in there for 15 years. Are you interested in sustainable design, recycled materials? Are you interested in highly energy efficient architecture, et cetera, et cetera? And for about 12 years, the answer we basically got was, yeah, sure, which meant really, not really, I'm not willing to pay for it. We have seen in our firm in the last couple of years a complete change in that we have clients coming to us now. We don't have to ask them, and asking us, is this sustainable? Or I've heard about this LEED thing, or is this green? And they are actually now becoming aware of the issue that is out there. And I think that's a subtle but really important thing that we all need to be on notice, because the development world and the architectural world, to a lesser extent, is very slow to change. Developers already take on more risk than everybody in this room who's not a developer cannot imagine taking on. Imagine taking a project on at work that if it doesn't go well, you lose your house and your family is out in the cold and you're bankrupt. That's the kind of risk a developer typically will take on. Builders, to some extent, a little more.
Media entrepreneurs too, but that's a different story.
So then add to that, if you're a developer, once you land on a product as a developer that is successful financially for you and your family, you tend to not want to move off of it. And so we have a very staid profession that's already taking a huge amount of risk that's going to be fairly slow to move. And I think everybody at this table today has done projects, have been involved in developments that have made money, that have been sustainable or had sustainable components. And that, I think, is a great hope. And I see this convergence of a changing industry with more awareness. I have every student that I hire and every architect in the room, every resume they get now from anybody under 25 or 30 years old says, what are the important parts of the industry to you? Green architecture, sustainability. It's inherent in our industry now. It's starting to percolate through development and through construction. But now we're also seeing it on the consumer side. And I think, and I'm hopeful that means that consumers are going to start either A, they're going to be willing to pay more, or B, they're going to be willing to take less product, meaning less square feet. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens over the next 5 years, but I've seen it in my own company and the way we operate, and we actually have had to advance our level of knowledge about sustainability and get LEED certified people on staff, and have actually had to kind of push to jump in front of the consumer.
Well, that's a very interesting point about the consumer side shifting, and I'm not sure how many of the developers who have presented or been in attendance are still here, but I'd be very interested in a show of hands if let's say people who see in the audience who deal with consumers or are developers or in that part of the process, do you see that shift? Just a show of hands, if you're in that area and you do see that shift. We've got about 10 hands. Okay, and if you're kind of in that area and do not see that shift, don't really see a significant change in what the market is asking for. We've got 2 hands. Okay, well that's an interesting sample.
10 architects and 2 developers. Because at the end of the day, unlike Rick, I don't have to sell it. I can design it, and design is everything. And I believe that a good design will sell, but the 2 developers out there.
Yeah, and I wonder, I don't know if Paul Johansson is still here, but I would be interested to ask him that question, in that he has 2 very different kinds of projects going that might speak to that. But I don't know if he's still around in the building, somebody grab him and tell him we're going to put him on the spot. Rick, maybe you could talk a little bit about the Wilma, and obviously that meets certain of the sustainable criteria in that it's an existing building, it's right in downtown, and therefore you're already a couple of steps down the curve. But when you look at what you're going to do with that project, what are some of the things you're going to do, and how are you going to do them in a way that might be a little different than would have been done 10 years ago?
Well, I think that the primary things that we're going to do with the Wilma to move it in that direction are a lot of the things that you talked about that had to do with selecting the project and why we were drawn to the project. It's an adaptive reuse project. It's right downtown. All of the things you said, promotes live and work. So there's not a lot beyond that in terms of the scope, because it's not a major construction project for us. One thing we're going to do has to deal with what I think is a major impediment to more of this type of urban redevelopment in Missoula, and that's an idea that we have to alleviate parking issues by having a shared car, a shared vehicle provided for our residents. We are using non-VOC paints in the hallways and the common areas. We're selling the condo units as is, so we're not renovating them. So the renovation work that we're doing in the condo areas and in the theater space that we control, we're trying to do appropriate material selections and things like that. But that would allow me to segue into some of what Jeff was pointing at me towards in terms of what I see in the marketplace as a developer. And I do see a market demand for green, but I see it in a very incremental way, in a way that does not address the urgency of the problem. I couldn't have agreed more with what Don MacArthur was saying and many of the principles he was espousing, but we've got a 10-year window, and we need radical change. We don't need a lot of new green subdivisions that are using photovoltaics and recycling rainwater, stuff like that. We need a radical cultural shift. And that, when you look at what is green, building a new green home isn't as green as not building a home, no matter how green you make that. So there are a lot of really difficult issues, and the movement that I'm seeing in the market is very incremental, and it's very exclusive. It very much comes from the higher end. And because it comes from the higher end, both in terms of the green models for development and the green models for construction, which are two very different things, is not creating as much of a critical mass as we need. And so if we're looking at more egalitarian models, I think we need a lot of help. And I think that thus far, the market has not provided a solution that is adequate. The market has provided a solution that is very incremental and very slow. And so I think that it's now a political issue. And it's a political issue in that we're talking about the environment, which we all share. We're talking about development that stretches shared resources like roads, sewers, public water systems, public health, public safety, all of those things. So I think it's time for us to look to our elected leaders to provide us with some portion of the solution. Some portion of it needs to come from the market, and I think some portion of it needs to come from our leaders. And I look at some models in different areas that I think are very encouraging. Australia as a nation just banned incandescent lighting, and you have to use compact fluorescent in Australia, and that's huge. Germany has real, meaningful, significant incentives, government incentives for small-scale renewable energy production. So you're seeing small solar, small wind attached to single-family residences because the government requires the energy companies to purchase the energy that's produced. So it's not a sort of a net zero type of thing. So keep it short, I think that the solution needs to go beyond the market, that the market isn't getting the job done. And that in other areas of our society, when the market doesn't provide solutions, we look for our government to provide those solutions.
I'm so glad he brought that up since I'm an elected official. I have to speak up because I've heard a lot of talk at this conference about politicians. I do happen to be a leader on climate change, but I'm not going to talk about that. I will say that knowing many of my colleagues, it helps to have voters that support these initiatives. So I've seen a lot of fingers pointed at politicians.
That would be fairly critical, I would think, right?
Right. And I also was a speaker Monday at the No Coal rally, and I was there with a friend who was supporting me because I was like, oh, I have to do this little rally speech. I'm not a rally speaker. And I looked around. I got my undergrad at University of Michigan in the 80s, and it was a very political campus. And I was at rallies there, and it was so exciting, and I was just full of hope and enthusiasm for the power of the people. But I went to this rally and I thought, geez, there's about 50, 100 people here. And this is one of the most critical issues we face as a nation and as a state, because we actually hold the largest coal reserves known in the United States. And yet we have, in a city that's very much in support of not building more coal plants, we only have 50 to 100 people there that are asking the governor to listen up and stop marketing his coal plans. And it was rather shocking to me to have to witness that. So I guess I want to say that we do need a radical shift, and there's things that really, that if we bring it back to the green building movement, Jeff's been very good at saying there's a push now that way. Well, what's really exciting about the green building movement is it always goes another step beyond what's kind of chic and hip to talk about. And I've heard a few people, including Don MacArthur, that have talked about land use and planning. And I think that I want to take the opportunity to say we can't just talk about green housing. We have to talk about green thinking or green planning. And one of the most recent articles I read that really kind of caught my attention and got me really excited was that transportation, the cost of the energy use that we use to get to and from our work or back to our homes is more destructive than the actual building. So a conventional building uses less energy than the transportation we use to get there. And so everybody sitting in this audience, whether or not you think it's affordable or not to do green building, well, that hits your pocketbook directly when you have to drive 20 miles a day to get to and from work. So not only is it hitting your pocketbook, but it also affects our environment and our use of fossil fuels. And the last thing I'll say on that is we need people in Missoula to support progressive new ideas on how to create land use that's denser and transit-oriented planning that allows for public transportation and bike paths and all those things that we hold dear but don't actually implement on the city scale.
Well, and I guess the thing that makes me a little uncomfortable about the conversation is that, we're sort of basically sitting here talking about what people ought to do when those are things that they have chosen not to do. And, this is a free country, and we have elected leaders who are elected by people who elect them to not do the things that we're talking about. So how do we work with that?
I think every day I wake up and I have 20 employees and 20 families on some level that I'm supposed to go find new work for. And I'm the first one to raise my hand here and say that I do quite a bit of work that is not sustainable, and that I drive, and that last weekend I flew to New York, and my carbon footprint's probably about the size of Cuba's carbon footprint. And I think that we all have to stand up and say, I think if we're perceived as four people up here saying this is what you need to do, then we're four hypocrites, because we're all in this together. We all have some relationship with an economic machine that we have to operate in, and that is back to tapping the green marketplace. We can't just say this is what we all need to do, and then go get in our $35,000 vehicles and drive home. And oh great, it's a Prius. I don't think that's. I think the general message is we have a great marketplace that's shifting. I think that we have a real directive, and it's interesting to hear Rick, private sector guy up here, and myself saying we need government assistance in doing that. But I think there is always the issue of if folks don't want it and they're not willing to pay for it, we're not going to be able to do it. None of us are here at this conference because we're all at home without jobs. So I think at the end of the day, you have to spin it all the way back to it's a combination of everything. We need government help. We need proactive designers. We need developers who are willing to take risks and show people projects that have never been done in Western Montana, have never been done in the West, period, and inspire people. But we also need the marketplace to come along. And to some extent, the marketplace is, and Rick's right, it's coming very slowly. To some extent, when gasoline hits $5, $6 a gallon, and I think if you read anything about oil production, gasoline prices are going up, and we are running out of the stuff. And that doesn't mean that we're going to wake up tomorrow and not have natural gas to heat our houses. What that means is the price is going to go way up, and guess what that's going to do? That's going to drive the consumers to make different decisions. Gee, maybe I'll live above where I work, 4 steps from my front door, downtown, a block from the river still, and I'll drive out to go elk hunting instead of living out and walking out my back door and elk hunting and driving into work because I'm paying $7,000 a month to drive into work. So I think that we're going to see by default of the private capitalist market and mainly the cost of fuel, I think we're going to see this green marketplace continue to expand. And on the other hand, and one last comment, Rick mentioned that a lot of this green marketplace is from more wealthy clientele. And that's absolutely true.
And I think that's a huge issue, by the way, because to the extent that it's perceived as an elitist thing for rich people, it doesn't fly politically.
It doesn't to some extent, but and there is a negative spin to it certainly. But the positive spin I'll put on it is twofold. The private clients who we have who come in and buy a ranch And there are great big issues about that. But they put one house on it that Kibo Group designs. Thank you very much. One house is all I want. And they put the rest in an easement. That's one of the most powerful tools, probably the most powerful tool we have in conservation today. The second point I want to make about the wealthy and it being hip, go to Aspen. Now, 10 years ago when I was in Aspen doing a house, it was who could do the biggest virgin log house. You know, the logs were this big around. Now it's who can do the house that's the most carbon neutral. And they sit around and talk about, at parties, who's got the most green house. That actually is a good thing, I think, because it trickles down. I mean, we all want to drive the same vehicles we see, not all of us, but many of us as consumers want to do what the rich people are doing. We want to emulate people who are successful in society. And the marketplace and marketers know that. And so if your favorite Hollywood star buys a Prius and buys offsets for their flights to go and do their next film, you're more likely to do so. And so it plays both sides, but I want to actuate the positive of that, because I think it's a great thing that the wealthy in America are. I have very, very politically conservative clients who are coming to me saying, I care about my grandkids, and I'm worried, and what can I do with my design? And that is a total paradigm shift. And will it take a while to shift down? Are there negatives? Absolutely, but I see it as an overall net huge positive.
I want to add something in, and I think that it's critical. This is the timing of this conference is very interesting because you know the first speaker really talked a little bit about the real estate market meltdown, and being someone that works for an organization that does home buyer education and looks at the housing market and the crash that's happening, we have to take that into account when we're making statements about what needs to happen in the next couple of years. It's an unstable future in housing. And let's just put it out there and start to be visionary, because the people that can weather this are the people that are visionaries and are willing to look at what the next step is. I always think of Missoula as about 5 years behind the rest of the country. We're just seeing the first condos really being developed in Missoula. Well, that was done in any urban area 5 years ago. And now they're having a condo market crash too, as the real estate market's crashing. But I think that what's critical here is that we've never had a housing choice. When you're talking about the market's not there, we haven't tested the market. And as you look at the demographics of Montana, we are an aging population. My parents are aging, so I happen to know what choice they made living in Minneapolis, which was, I don't want to take care of the lawn anymore, and I'm tired of shoveling the snow in the morning. And I think that's going to be true for people as they recognize what is the quality of life they're looking for and what choices do I have. When you don't have choices, you don't know, you don't really know what the market's willing to bear.
Right. No, I think that's a very good point. And Rick, I'm curious. You know, you're building condos at the Wilma. I mean, you know, I know you're not marketing them yet, I guess, or maybe you are. But I'm just interested in what you see as the demand for downtown condos in Missoula. Colin Bangs, who has some condo projects, wasn't able to be here. But this was my big question for him: is there really a market for downtown condos?
Yes.
He's marketing
them
them now.
That's good to know.
No, two examples. We did a small condo redevelopment project across the river from the Wilma building. It was my first real standalone development where I was the developer. I had financial partners on it who I felt terribly responsible to. And I was doing 3 high-end condos upstairs, 3. And I had realtors walk through before the construction was done, before we marketed, and looked at me and said, "You're selling these for $265 a square foot? You're crazy. They're never going to sell." I didn't sleep a lot for a few months. They sold in 72 hours. Rick had a similar experience when the Wilma kind of accidentally, you know, the first Missoulian article came out, and I think, you know, it'd be safe to say you were overwhelmed with interest. So you're absolutely right in that the market hasn't been exposed to these new ideas of different ways of living. Now, does everybody want to live downtown a block from where they work? I didn't even know if I did, and I love it, by the way. But no, everybody doesn't. We live in Montana for a reason. Most of us value the great outdoors, and some people want to live out there. But these other products really haven't been thrown out there. And the ones that have been thrown out there have sold.
I would just like to say that my experience with the Wilma, affordable housing is a technical term that Betsy works in, but while our square footage prices are quite high, our gross dollar prices are quite reasonable in comparison to the median home price in Missoula. It's, our average gross price is about $150,000, so we felt very good that while we were taking these low-cost rentals out of the market, we were providing relatively affordable for-sale product. Great in theory, most of our units were bought by wealthy people. So while this may be potentially a great solution for affordable home ownership, that wasn't a part of the market that we really saw. I'd say 75% of the people who bought our units I would classify as quite well off.
So they're already sold? I'm behind the curve here, I guess.
They are already all sold.
I'm sorry?
They are already all under contract and in the process of moving towards closing.
How many were there?
24 residential units.
He said they're sold.
Sorry.
They range in size from about 330 square feet to about 700 square feet, so they're quite small.
Interesting. And one of the things, on this issue of kind of demand and affordability, I mean, I think, Homeward is, nationally recognized as having done incredible work, and some of the things that Don showed were Homeward projects, and I think show how you can build, great stuff that's affordable and sustainable, and those are great models. And one of the things I sort of wonder is I think this makes sense, that one of the reasons that all kind of works is because you as Homeward as a nonprofit are able to look at some of these things from a much longer time frame, a longer payback time frame than what a private developer is able to do. And so I was wondering if you had, from your experience, if you had thoughts as to how you can kind of bring some of the economics of what makes those projects work to the commercial arena that has somewhat different imperatives.
Well, that's a really good point. I mean, in the commercial arena, though, you mean in terms of private residential development?
Yeah.
There are tax credits and rebates available, both federally and state, that would work well if developers got acquainted with them. They would have to educate the consumer about how to apply for those. They're also available for the builder if they so want to choose to apply for those. They don't always cover the full cost, but really I believe this is somewhat about marketing and getting people that are purchasing to recognize, well, am I going to be here for 5 years? Is this a home that I'm going to be in for 10 years? Am I buying my dream home because it is such high quality and it's exactly what I want? So therefore the cost of this, the additional $40 a month on my mortgage or $20 a month is worth it. So I think that there is, if you truly are as a developer and interested in tapping into that market, you have to become really aware of the finances, the tax incentives, and I would also say that outside of Montana, there's even mortgage products that are both oriented towards green building as well as oriented towards smart land use transportation. So if you're building closer to the city, you can get a reduced mortgage because they take into account, you can actually, I'm sorry, not a reduced mortgage, but you can actually get a higher mortgage. You can qualify for more because they know you're going to spend less on a car. Or maybe your 2-person or 4-person household is only going to have one car because one of you is going to walk to work and the other is going to use the car to go back and forth or whatever. Those products are out there, so it's about creating that demand and working with folks that are aware of them to bring them to Montana.
Great. We have time for a few questions, comments, if we have questions in the front here. Angie?
Angie Lipsky, MMW. I just think as architects and designers, we've got to be bold and we've got to put products on the market that are a little bit ahead of the curve because people start talking about these ideas and if they can't buy anything, it's kind of pointless and it's a little stale and stagnant and whatever. And secondly, I think that while the architects and designers and, we need bold developers and we need policymakers and that sort of thing to get on board, we also need all the other people in this world and in the community. We're hoping to get this project on the U of M campus, and if we get it, we're bringing in all the departments. We're bringing in forestry, agriculture, chemistry, biology, finance, business for green collar power. We're bringing in all these people and really charging them to invent and to be part of the solution. And don't just expect everybody else to find the solution for us, because it's not just limited to architecture and development and real estate. It's out there in every aspect, and that's really the smart. That's where, I mean, I think, I wish I was an inventor. I aspire to be an inventor, because, you know, everybody has the solution, and we just have to figure out what's the waste product and and if people are talking to each other, I think the various solutions are going to get put together.
Well, and I think your point is well taken about, you know, people don't necessarily know what they want or will find appealing until you show it to them. And I think that's something that applies in many fields, and I think this is one of them for sure.
My name is Leslie Jensen. My comment, too, is probably more editorial than question-oriented, because there was a lot of discussion about how you can't build sustainably or green and have the cost on a apples-to-apples basis be consistent with traditional. And I would submit that, you know, people don't want 3,500 square foot homes on 5 acres with sort of lower end and environmentally insensitive accoutrements, because they went out and researched that and decided that for themselves, based on their own values, this would be preferable. You know, they got marketed to. I mean, we've had bigger is better marketed to us since we were in the 70s. You know, my family, I grew up in a house that was 900 square feet on the main floor and 900 in the basement, 5 people, 1 bathroom. We weren't totally middle class. We might have been just slightly south of that, but you know, we didn't know there was anything wrong with the way we were living. And yet now, you mentioned Paul, who I know well. He, in their homestead project, he's talking to people who they're going to need to pay $1 million for the piece of land, and they really only have $1.5 million or $1.7 million. And their quandary is, can I put a $700,000 house on $1 million piece of land? And I said, you know, and this is not even part of my reality, but I could understand someone with that kind of money wanting that $1 million piece of land. I could also understand them wanting to put something relatively small on it. And I said, well, what is the smallest, you know, do you have covenants that require a certain size? And he said, yeah, 3,500 square feet is the smallest size you can put on. I'm like, well, that doesn't work. You know, maybe people don't want 3,500 square feet anymore. And so what I think has to happen, and I don't know whose job it is. I don't think it's government. I don't know who's going to take charge of it. Maybe it's a collective effort, and part of it is happening right here. But people need to be marketed to. You know, if you can have, I mean, Rick's condos, 300 square feet to 700 square feet, if they're nicely appointed, wealthy people are buying them. These aren't people who, you know, can't afford anything larger. Well, we need to market these concepts. We need to educate people and really let them be enthusiastic about smaller spaces and lower carbon footprints or whatever, rather than convincing them that, you know, you should sacrifice quality for quantity.
Yeah, good point.
You know,
Yeah, I think the marketing end of it, I absolutely agree, is a very big part of the equation. Roger?
Thanks. You know, it was great to hear Rick saying that the government needs to get out in front of this and elected officials need to get out in front of this because the market can't handle it by itself. I don't think that government can handle it by itself either. But what I usually hear from the market is lower my fees and get the hell out of the way. So I wonder from, you know, all of you guys are engaged in development. We're in the process of updating our transportation plan. We're in the process of updating our zoning ordinance. Specific suggestions would be great, and then the other thing would be, you know, participate, engage your, you know, encourage your peers to participate. A lot of times government goes out and reaches out to the community and we don't hear from development, from the development interest, or what we hear from the development interest is, again, cut my fees, get out of the way. You know, impact fees, all we've heard from the development community, you hadn't heard a whole lot, but it's been negative. You know, what are some specific ideas, and how do we in government who are working on this problem, how do we work with the development community?
Can I take that? Well, Roger, first of all, we're very lucky to have you here running OPG. Second, I would say regarding the current proposal for impact fees, that we need to have the impact fees charged where the impact is happening. And so when you look at a downtown project that is tapping into public sewer and public water, within a mere matter of feet, using very little transportation infrastructure, et cetera, I can understand why a developer would have issues with paying major impact fees in order to extend the sewer farther out towards the Y. So I think that for me as a developer, when I'm doing a development that is having a major impact on public infrastructure, please charge me the fees that adequately reflect what my project is impacting. And when I'm not, it's very hard for me to justify wanting to pay those fees. Regarding public process, I don't know how to answer that. It's very difficult when people are busy, but we should all engage as much as possible.
You know, one of the things that we have done is I gathered a group of friends, acquaintances, and fellow developers, and have started a roundtable for sustainable development, and it really should be for more sustainable development. And we've been meeting on a regular basis. Betsy and Rick are both part of that. And the discussion is, okay, we've all, and there's 6 or 7 people involved, we've all done developments on our own, and they've been, lead boilerplate, or they've been very progressive, or we've made an effort. But this group of people are all developers, and they all care about this community and where it's headed, and they all care about the planet and where it's headed. It's not your average group of developers, mind you. And we've met several times, probably 4 or 5 times now, and the goals are multifaceted. One of them, Roger, is to participate in the public process, in the rezoning effort, in the downtown master planning effort, and to have a voice that may be a little different than the average, quote, average developer's voice about such things as impact fees. And the last meeting we had met with Tim Murphy and talked about his efforts and talked about impact fees specifically. So there is that effort out there. I think all 5 or 6 of us wrote letters to you to try to get on the advisory board, and none of us got on, though. So,
well, and Roger, if I could, ask you, I mean, what would you like to see in terms of something that would be helpful to you in developing in this process of updating these ordinances and so forth?
Well, we're looking for people to engage. One of the biggest problems that I saw when I got to town was the lack of trust. The stuff that we've got, the ordinances we have, are so bad that 2 well-intentioned, intelligent people can read the same paragraph and walk away with it with completely different interpretations of what's going on. And when they both feel that they understand it and they're completely different, somebody's lying. And what we need to do is we need to reestablish that trust. We've been listening to people. What I don't want to see happen is, like the Broadway charrette, where the business community basically boycotted that process and then complained at the end that nobody asked them. And so I think what we need to do as a community, we're doing everything we can to engage people in traditional ways and in not so traditional ways. You've got your group. We're more than happy to show up, and we'll talk with anybody who's willing to listen to us. We'll listen to anybody that wants to talk with us. But we've got to hear early enough on. I heard from the architect from Victor Driggs, great place, by the way. Getting involved early in the process makes the difference. We would hate to hear from the business community and from the development community when it's already been through the planning board and we're up in front of the city council for adoption. So early engagement would be great, and let us know if you're looking for government to push you some direction. Give us a sense of the direction that we need to push.
Well, thank you. If the city could provide downtown parking or it could adjust the code. A lot more developers could provide a lot more product in terms of both, downtown condo residential and in terms of commercial office spaces that meet a lot of the criteria that we're talking about in terms of adaptive reuse, density, verticality, and live and work type stuff. So the parking issue is a major issue with redevelopment downtown.
I just want to add something, and it's totally contrary to the process. But when you said that, Roger, what I really thought in my head, my heart was, I want a leader that puts forth a vision that the community has to respond to, but really talks about this piece that we have to face, which is that, and maybe call me crazy, but I do believe we have hit our peak oil, and I do believe that climate change is something that has to be addressed in the next 10 years. And so I want a leader. I want this not to be something that is just waiting for somebody else, that enough political will from the people to step up in that public process and do it. I kind of want it to be put out there like, we will not develop in the same way that we are developing. Done. Let's start the discussion on what are we going to create that's the new vision for Missoula, because we expect 100,000 people in the next 50 years. How do we do that? So that's a contrary to the process, because we always just let people come to the mic at these meetings and just kind of speak their piece, and then somehow we try to assimilate all of that into something that's supposed to be consensus. And being someone that sat through the 2007 session, I know what that means to come to consensus, and it means you go nowhere. So I kind of wish that we had somebody that could really take that step forward and maybe risk political suicide. But it'd be sure refreshing.
You volunteering for that role?
If I were in that position, I would.
Well, we do have to wrap up here, but I wanted to offer Jennifer the last words. You know, you are not from Missoula and are kind of witnessing a little bit of our kind of internal family conversation here, but just wonder what your thoughts are, and if you have kind of suggestions for how we can kind of bring some of these things to fruition.
Well, it's kind of interesting because we're in Teton County, Idaho, we face a lot of the same problems that you guys are talking about. And actually, the city of Victor just recently came to the developers. They had a little downtown property owners meeting, and the city went to the developers and said, what do you guys want us to do? And the developers are looking at the city and saying, what do you mean? We want to know what you want for your city. And so it is, and just recently the city of Victor did hire a planning and zoning director who does have a vision, and a really strong vision for traditional neighborhood design and bringing that into the city of Victor, and that's one of our other projects. And he's currently working on a traditional neighborhood overlay, because that was one of our challenges, trying to develop density in the cities. I mean, you guys talk about a half-acre or third-acre lot being too big. Well, I mean, the smallest lot that's allowed in the city of Victor is like a quarter of an acre. And so it's like, that's a city, it's in the city. We need more density. And so that's, some of the similar things that we're facing down there. We do at least have zoning in the county. I was surprised to hear about that. Holy cow. We do not have any development fees or impact fees enacted, and that's been a real problem down there too, and having trying to get development to pay its way. But I think there is hope. And can I end on a positive note on this?
Please, and I wanted to ask, before we do that, is there in fact this kind of conversation about these issues? Is that happening also in Driggs and Victor?
It is happening, and we have some new county commissioners. Hopefully they can stay in office. There's some folks that were upset that they got elected. Is there anyone else from Idaho here? No, okay.
Yeah, there's a couple.
So I can say all kinds of things and no one's going to get mad at me. But anyway, so some more progressive pro-planning commissioners elected, and so there's a lot more dialogue going on, and they're trying to help curb the sprawl that's happening. And of course, we're very active in trying to promote conservation. And, kind of getting back to what you were saying earlier, that not everyone wants to live in a tiny little house in downtown, because a lot of people move to the west because they want those wide open spaces. And so what we do is we look at projects that are either out in the counties and try to do it in a conservation way and preserve some of the features on the site and cluster the homes, or the in-town get as much density as the city will allow you type development. But I do think there's a change in the marketplace, and I think that it's partly consumer-driven. I think Christopher, the very first speaker, spoke about how recessions come about, and it starts with the consumer, and consumers curbing their spending, which causes industry to reduce their spending, and it has this big effect. So I do think that, you know, if everyone leaves here with anything, is that the consumer does have a lot of power, and that drives the market, which drives developers to do green designs. And then I think the bar will just keep getting raised, and to be higher and higher. It's really a technology. I don't think it's a trend that's going to go away. I think it's a technology that's going to continue to improve, and I think that's what is going to have to happen.
Well, great. Well, that's a good note to end on. And in other words, we all, as consumers, can have a big influence on this process, in addition to politicians and developers and planners. So, thank you very much for a terrific panel. Appreciate it.